Imagine stepping into a nightmare. The air is thick with the stench of decay. Dust motes dance in the faint light filtering through grimy windows. You are inside Ed Gein's farmhouse, a macabre museum of the grotesque. Human skin is draped over furniture. Skulls stare blankly from the shelves. A lampshade, fashioned from human skin, casts an eerie glow. This was no ordinary home, it was a charnel house. The floorboards creak underfoot as you move through the house. Each room reveals another layer of horror. In the kitchen, you find a soup pot with human organs. Upstairs, a bedroom is adorned with clothing made from human flesh. The air is heavy with the weight of unimaginable atrocities. The farmhouse stood isolated on the outskirts of Plainfield, Wisconsin. Neighbors rarely ventured near the property. This is the story of Ed Gein, the butcher of Plainfield. Edward Gein was born on August 27, 1906, into a world that seemed designed to crush his spirit. His birthplace was the same farmhouse that would later become a shrine to his macabre obsessions. His parents, George and Augusta Gein, were a study in contrasts. George was a weak-willed alcoholic, unable to hold down a steady job. Augusta was a domineering religious fanatic who ruled her family with an iron fist. Augusta reserved a special kind of hatred for women. She considered them instruments of the devil, temptresses who lured men away from God. Augusta instilled this twisted worldview in her two sons, Ed and Henry. She kept them isolated on the farm, shielding them from the corrupting influence of the outside world. Ed was a shy and awkward child, prone to fits of laughter that seemed to spring from some dark, unknown source. He was bullied mercilessly by his classmates, finding solace only in the company of his mother. Little did Ed know that his mother's love would prove to be a double-edged sword, shaping his destiny in the most horrific way imaginable. Life on the Gein farm was a bleak and unforgiving affair. The brothers Ed and Henry toiled endlessly under the watchful eye of their overbearing mother. As they grew older, Henry began to chafe under Augusta's oppressive rule. He dared to challenge her beliefs, to dream of a life beyond the confines of the farm. Ed, however, remained utterly devoted to his mother. He saw the world through her eyes, embracing her warped worldview as his own. In 1940, tragedy struck the Gein family. George, Ed's alcoholic father, died of heart failure. With George gone, Augusta's hold over Ed tightened. Just 4 years later, another death rocked the Gein family. Henry died under mysterious circumstances while fighting a brush fire with Ed. Though whispers of foul play circulated through the community, the official cause of death was ruled asphyxiation. Ed, now utterly alone with his mother, retreated further into himself. Augusta suffered a series of debilitating strokes that left her bedridden and dependent on Ed for care. Ed tended to his mother with unwavering devotion. In December 1947, she breathed her last, leaving Ed utterly alone in the world. Augusta's death shattered Ed Gein's world. He was 41 years old, utterly alone and consumed by grief. He boarded up his mother's room, preserving it as a shrine. The rest of the farmhouse, however, he allowed to descend into squalor. He lost himself in his work, taking on odd jobs for local farmers. Unbeknownst to the townsfolk, a dark obsession was taking root in Ed Gein's mind. He began spending his nights reading anatomy books and poring over articles about Nazi concentration camps. He developed a morbid fascination with the female body, particularly the anatomy of women who reminded him of his mother. Driven by his twisted desires, Ed Gein began making nightly pilgrimages to local cemeteries. He would exhume the bodies of recently deceased women, often digging them up on the very night of their burial. At first he would simply look at the corpses, trying to recapture the feeling of his mother's presence. But his compulsions soon spiraled out of control. Ed Gein began collecting body parts, fashioning them into grotesque trophies that he displayed in his home. The once ordinary farmhouse was transformed into a charnel house, a macabre monument to Ed Gein's descent into utter madness. The darkness in Ed Gein deepened with each passing night. His excursions to the cemeteries became more frequent, his actions more brazen. He would spend hours prowling among the tombstones, searching for fresh graves. His criteria were specific middle-aged women, preferably those who resembled his mother. His tools were simple: a shovel, a pickaxe, and a crowbar. He worked quickly and quietly, his movements honed by practice. The freshly turned earth offered little resistance to his efforts. Soon, he would be standing over another corpse, bathed in the pale moonlight, his heart pounding with a mixture of fear and excitement. Back at the farmhouse, his gruesome work continued. He would skin the bodies, carefully preserving the flesh with salt. He fashioned masks from the faces of his victims, wearing them around the house as if trying to assume their identities. He draped himself in their skin, attempting to crawl inside the bodies of the women he could never have in life. Word of the grave robberies spread throughout Plainfield. The authorities were dismissive, thinking these were just tall tales, the product of overactive imaginations. The disappearance of Bernice Worden on November 16, 1957, sent shockwaves through Plainfield. Bernice, the owner of the local hardware store, was a pillar of the community, a kind and respected woman. Her disappearance was as baffling as it was horrifying. The last anyone had seen of her was at her store, where a sales slip recorded a purchase made by Ed Gein earlier that afternoon. Armed with a search warrant, Sheriff Arthur Schley and his deputy made their way to the Gein farmhouse. As they approached the dilapidated building, a sense of dread washed over them. The door creaked open, revealing a scene of unimaginable horror. The stench of decay was overpowering. The floor was littered with debris and what appeared to be bones. Moving through the house, they stumbled upon a gruesome discovery in the shed. Bernice Worden's headless body hung upside down, gutted and dressed like a deer. The horrifying tableau confirmed their worst fears. Ed Gein, the harmless eccentric, was a monster in disguise. News of Ed Gein's arrest spread like wildfire. The quiet town of Plainfield was besieged by reporters and curiosity seekers, all eager for a glimpse into the mind of the monster who had lived among them. Ed Gein, initially stoic and unresponsive, eventually confessed to the murders of Bernice Worden and Mary Hogan, a local tavern owner who had disappeared 3 years earlier. During his trial, Gein's bizarre behavior and detached demeanor painted a chilling portrait of a man detached from reality. Deemed mentally unfit to stand trial for murder, Ed Gein was committed to the Central State Hospital for the Criminally Insane in Walpun, Wisconsin. He would spend the rest of his days confined within the walls of the institution. The trial of Ed Gein was over, but the fascination with his crimes was just beginning. His story became a macabre legend passed down through generations. The impact of Ed Gein's crimes extended far beyond the quiet confines of Plainfield, Wisconsin. The gruesome nature of his crimes, coupled with his disturbing motivations, captured the imagination of writers, filmmakers, and artists, giving birth to a new breed of horror villains. Robert Bloch, inspired by the Gein case, penned the novel Psycho just 3 years after Gein's arrest. The character of Norman Bates, a seemingly harmless motel owner with a dark secret and an unhealthy obsession with his mother, borrowed heavily from the real-life horrors unveiled in Plainfield. Alfred Hitchcock's iconic film adaptation of Psycho further cemented Gein's influence on popular culture. Tobe Hooper's 1974 masterpiece, The Texas Chainsaw Massacre, drew inspiration from Gein's penchant for creating trophies from human remains. The film's antagonist, Leatherface, a hulking brute who wears a mask made from human skin, is a chilling echo of the real-life monster who terrorized rural Wisconsin. Even Hannibal Lecter, the brilliant cannibalistic psychiatrist from Thomas Harris's The Silence of the Lambs, owes a debt to Ed Gein. Lecter's macabre interest in human anatomy and his chillingly polite demeanor while discussing his gruesome crimes can be seen as a more refined take on the horrors unearthed in that Wisconsin farmhouse. Ed Gein died of respiratory failure in 1984. He was 77 years old. He died as he had lived alone, forgotten, and haunted by the demons of his own making. His grave, located in the Plainfield Cemetery, is a site of morbid fascination to this day. The legacy of Ed Gein, however, lives on. His story continues to fascinate and horrify in equal measure. He has become a ghoulish folk figure, a cautionary tale whispered around campfires and late-night sleepovers. Ed Gein's crimes tapped into a deep-seated fear that resides within us all, the fear of the unknown, the fear of the darkness that can lurk beneath the surface of the ordinary. He showed us that monsters don't always lurk in the shadows. Sometimes they hide in plain sight, disguised as quiet neighbors, unassuming handymen, or the seemingly harmless boy next door.